Today we're going to get practical, and our topic is on conflict and healthy communication. And I imagine for a lot of you, this is probably the area where you've struggled the most in your marriage, is actually having a conversation and trying to work past arguments that turn into nothing productive but are only hurtful. I want you to notice that our focus in this principle is that healthy couples fight right. Notice that we don't say healthy couples don't fight. The reality is, if you're willing to fight for something, if you're willing to put the energy into fighting for your perspective or for something to be better, then that means you care about it, which is a good thing in our marriages. We should want to fight for what's right and what's healthy. Now, here's a great definition to know if you're doing that well. How do you know if you're fighting correctly? Well, you gain by the struggle. What we mean by that is, if you guys are having a conversation and you can actually resolve it and move forward, then you know that you have gained by the struggle of the argument. Now, here's a couple things we want to pay attention to, that if you're doing these three things, you're not going to gain by the struggle. Escalation, which is yelling, swearing, calling each other names. Withdrawing is kind of shutting down, closing off, forget it, nothing's wrong kind of sentiments. Invalidation is also super unhealthy. It's just kind of putting the other person down, making your spouse feel like they're not smart enough to understand your perspective. These three things are never going to be productive. You'll never gain by the struggle using these. So the question then is, well, how do you fight correctly then? What does that look like? Well, here's a couple things I'm going to highlight. First, make sure you prepare your heart. When you go into a conversation with your spouse, remember they have a perspective too, and you both need to be willing to listen and care about the other person's perspective. Second, you need to remember that you work as a team. Do not let arguments, conflicts, situations divide you. Look at it as something that you guys together need to figure out. The third part is where you get more practical. You got to learn how to communicate and talk through. Most couples end up fighting more about the how they're fighting than the what. So you kind of lose sight of what you're actually upset about, because now you're arguing about how your tone of voice was, or you're yelling at one another, you're calling each other names. So how can you communicate more clearly? Well, first, you want to use your I feel because statements. Put it in a sentence that says, I'm feeling this way because. If we start a sentence with you are something, then that puts our spouse on the defensive and they don't want to listen. As your spouse is using an I feel because statement, the other person is actively listening. And what we mean by that is listen, pay attention. Don't be trying to form your rebuttal. Be able to repeat back what you hear to show and to demonstrate that you're listening to what your spouse has to say. Sometimes it is appropriate to take a brief timeout just for a few minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, because you guys are both starting to escalate and yell and scream. It's good to kind of take a break, but then you got to make sure you come back. You also want to make sure that you're both ready and willing to take ownership. You both will have things that you'll need to change. Again, both of you have a perspective, so be willing to take ownership of your part. And the last step is identify action steps, meaning how are you guys going to avoid this conflict in the future? Have a plan of how you're going to go about that. So read through conflict. This is going to take a lot of practice. Pull this out the next time you're going to have an argument, because it really counts when you're about ready to have a discussion that could get heated. And so I hope this goes well for you. Pay attention. Be mindful of how conflict can be a healthy thing, and keep working at it. Good luck.